Hello, this is Ian Griffiths, and this is the Armed Forces Resettlement in Conversation podcast. Okay, so welcome to this episode of the Armed Forces Resettlement in Conversation podcast. This week's guest is Graham Brown. Graham runs a business called Forces Recruitment Solutions Group, who have been established for 19 years since 2001. They are ex-military recruitment specialists. The reason that I wanted to get Graham onto the podcast this week was I want to take the podcast in a direction where we're getting both sides of the story, you know, from a resettlement, people who have done resettlement and gone through it recently, but also from a recruitment point of view, and get people on who can actually help people who are coming out of the forces. So that's why Graham is on, and I don't feel that there's any better guest to start that with. So with no further ado, welcome to the podcast, Graham.
Thank you, Ian. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, brilliant. And so what I'd like to start, what I usually do with most guests is you've served in the military, and I'd just like to ask you a bit about your service. When did you start? When did you sign up? When did you come out? And what regiment were you in?
Sure. So I joined up in 1987. Quite a while ago now. You can see with the shape of the hair, and served for 6 years. So I joined up as a musician. Did a couple of tours in the States, tour of Kenya, and of course Gulf War in '91. All the sunny spots. A couple of tours in Belize as well. So fairly well travelled. Joined up as a musician, played cornet, trumpet, bass guitar, piano, sung a little bit as well. And I was part of one RHF regimental band before the bands were all disbanded and merged into one Scottish divisional band.
Okay, and so when you signed up, where did you do your basic training and things like that? I'm not sure. I've never ever spoken to anyone who'd been in the sort of band section within the armed forces, so it's quite interesting.
Oh, well, as bandsmen, we get quite an easy ride, to be honest. We don't do the full basic training, so you do 8 weeks because you don't have to do a lot of the field craft and the in-depth military skills that you would expect from an infantry soldier. So our secondary trade would be as medics. So I had to do my RMA 3 medical course as part of my secondary trade. And when we went to the Gulf, we served as medics. Of course, we got posted to a field hospital in '91, and we thought we might actually get a chance to practice a little bit of medicine, which might be a welcome break from doing some of the musical stuff. And we pitched up at a field hospital, and we were the lowest qualified medics there because it was full of doctors, nurses, surgeons. So we ended up staggering on for 3 months, 24 on, 24 off. The 24 off was 12 hours of pan bashing. So, the character building in there was a wire brush, cleaning out the Dixies with from scrambled egg and stuff like that. So, certainly built the character up. But it's amazing how the military shapes your life and your career, though. I think the skills and traits that the military helped to develop in me are still with me today, and I don't regret my military career for a second. It's why I'm doing a lot of what I'm doing now. So I look back with very fond memories. And I think I missed the camaraderie. I think that's probably what most people when they leave the forces do. It's the one core thing that binds us all together. But a lot of the work that I've done since, it's all been about veterans, and you have a little bit of in-service banter. You always have that, but you're either a veteran or you're not, and that core that binds us all together is so important when we're talking to veterans.
Yeah, I mean, I can fully relate to that. I only did a really sort of the minimum service that you could do. I left after just over 5 years, and when I left, I was kind of, you kind of just dumped into civilian life, and when you've been so used to being around other people and who have got the same sort of banter as you, and you can't just like sort of rock up to your new job and use expletives in the way that you would do when you're in the mess deck or, you know, on camp or whatever. And it really, it is a sort of culture shock, isn't it, when you've done it for such a long time? I can totally relate to that as well.
It's a big shift of lifestyle. I think some people are able to transition easier than others, and the ones that manage to transition successfully over a relatively short period really go on to greater things. And some of the guys that struggle in those first few months especially just need a little bit of extra support. And sometimes that's the camaraderie of veterans like ourselves to just give them a little bit of a leg up. Sometimes it's talking to other veterans in businesses. So it's not just you and I that have got responsibility for that. I think every veteran has got a part to play in helping some of their service leaver colleagues to transition effectively. It's all of responsibility, really, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm sort of frightened of, well, I don't know, frightened of, but wary of maybe is the right word, that because I left quite a long time ago, and you know, I left in 2007, you left quite a bit longer than me, that the forces is a very different place now, and resettlement is a completely different place to what it was back then. And I didn't get any resettlement because I hadn't served, you know, 6 years or more. So I can only really be the host of this podcast and just sort of try and help people out, and also let people know what my mistakes were, because, you know, I was still a relatively young man. I think I was at the age of maybe 24 or 25 when I left, and I thought that I knew everything, and I thought, oh, I've been in the military, I'll get handed a job when I get out. And I didn't make any plans or prep. I left with no job. And, you know, I found myself, it took me a good few years, 4 years, I think it was, until I was sort of working at the level I should have been when I left, really. But so I can only really get that message across to people, and that's what I do. Otherwise, I can sort of find myself being a bit sort of irrelevant to them, really. You can only sort of tell them about your experience with regards to resettlement, which brings me nicely on to the next question. So you joined in 1987, you did 6 years, which makes that 1993 when you left?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So when you left in 1993, what was resettlement like? What was the process like back then? I bet it's a bit different because there was no sort of internet, computers, and all that sort of palaver back then.
No, well, we cavemen and dinosaurs back then, so it was a very different transition process. That was under the old TSRO days, so it was before the CTP was born. That was four or 5 years later. But the support wasn't great. But back in '93, it was pretty much you go and see your unit resettlement officer. It was a quick sign off, out the door. You tab in quickly. You're out inside 2 minutes. Then I went to see my second line advisor, and he said, "You're a musician. Don't really know what to do with you. Why don't you pop down to your local job centre, do a psychometric test, and see how that comes out?" That was the sum total of the advice, because there wasn't a tick box for musician. Had I been a clerk, a logistician, a driver, an engineer, all the tick boxes are there for that, but musician just wasn't on the radar. So I did exactly that. Went down to my job centre in Cambridge. My last posting was Oakington Barracks in Cambridge, and did a psychometric assessment, and that came out as sales and recruitment. So ironically, it wasn't actually the worst advice. It was a bit of a stab in the dark, but it worked out quite well, because I'm still in the same game all these years later. If I could say as well, I think you're what you said earlier about your own experience. I think you're doing yourself a massive disservice there, Iain, because you're either a veteran or you're not. You know, if you've been in for 1 day, you're a veteran. You know, you've been in for long enough to understand what the military brings, what the skills bring, what the mindset brings. Really, really important. And I think everything you're doing with this podcast is absolutely wonderful. You're raising the awareness of veterans, helping them to get them into work. That's awesome. So don't do yourself a disservice, mate. You're doing a grand job.
Yeah. It's just sometimes, I just sort of see the different sort of terminologies at some of the resettlement events, and sometimes I don't get a bit an understanding of it. I've got a very good friend who was a regimental sergeant major in the signal. No, he'll kill me if I don't get this right. Regimental sergeant major. I think he was in the signals. He'll probably lynch me for getting that wrong, but his name's John Stevenson, and sometimes I have to ask John questions and say, what does this mean? What does that mean? What do they do? And CTP, because I didn't know what CTP was, because I didn't do any resettlement myself, So, yeah, I just get my information from him and swat up a little bit, and that's all I can do, I suppose.
As you know, though, Iain, the military loves a good acronym, and they've got an acronym for everything.
They have, yeah.
I'm all right with my acronyms, but there are even times where some of the guys will catch me out, and I'm straight on to Google or the Army Rumour Service trying to find out what something is. So you're in good company, mate.
I got a lesson on what SO1, SO2, and SO3 was the other day, because I keep seeing it in people's titles, and it's generally just linked to a sort of rank that you are within whichever regiment or ship or whatever you're on. But because I'm not an officer, or never was an officer, I didn't know what it meant. So I got a little crash course on that a couple of days ago, and now I know what that means. So, right. So this, moving on from your resettlement back then, and it wasn't great, and it has turned out all right for you, and they were pretty correct. They were pretty bang on and pinpointed in Cambridge Job Centre, to be fair to them. So you see people coming to your door who are in resettlement now, or they've just left, or whatever. How do you view resettlement now? What do you think it's like now compared to back then? Or, what are you sort of views on resettlement now?
To be fair to the CTP, what the system was and what it is now is a very, very different shape. And the reality is, you're never going to keep every service leaver happy. You will get some people that will, hold up the CTP and say they're amazing, and others that didn't have a good experience, and they can't get a job for everybody. That's no single body or agency can do that. It's just impossible. So I think what the CTP can do is try and facilitate good advice, and give the guidance that they can through the network that they've got, and through agencies like ourselves, veteran agencies, to open the network up and try and do everything they can to try and support and guide these guys through the last couple of years of transition, and then into work. And that, I would say, that first 12 months post service really is the cliff face. And I think the longer you've served, the more of a challenge some people find that. Not everybody, because it really depends on your own experience, and it isn't the same for two people. So a lot of the support and guidance is just trying to manage that cliff face and make it more like a slope for some of the guys, and help them to understand that actually civil life isn't that bad. It's just trying to prepare them for what's to come. And I think we all have a collective responsibility to help and part with that.
Yeah, and resettlement isn't just about finding education, is it? And finding employment. You may need some education when you're coming out. You may need to do your NEBOShes, some health and safety courses, different types of courses to get you onto the career path that you do want to do. And then there's all sorts of different aspects. And until I started doing this sort of, being involved in this sort of arena, you might have to move somewhere. You might be moving back home. You might be moving to where you might have married somebody, a guy or a girl or whoever, from another part of the country. You might be going to settle somewhere else where you're not used to, getting your kids into different schools. You may need to sort of get a mortgage if you've not had a mortgage before, if you've been living on camp. There's all sorts of different aspects of resettlement, and it's such an uncertain time, and you've got to find employment as well. There's just so much to do, and I feel that if you know you're going to be leaving in 2, 3, 4, even 5 years, start making your plan to because the earlier you start making that plan, the easier it's going to be on you when you do actually hand that ID card in and
That's
you
right.
go in.
Well, one of the things I did in between setting FRS up and leaving, I was recruited, headhunted to be the sales manager of the Officer magazine. So I ran that for a year and then set Quest magazine up. So I ran that for 3 years before I set FRS up. And a lot of what Quest was all about was that transition piece, how to use your resettlement grant. LCAS was just coming in at that time as well, and it was the best kept secret in the military at the time. You know, it's very well publicised now. Very few civvies know about it, and I'm staggered with the number of employers that I speak to. You know, even some veteran employers as well who've been out for a while. They've got no idea what LCAS is all about. The guys know. They don't always know what to spend their LCAS credits on. And as you say, the more educated they are on that, the more they think about where they want to be, rather than just try and take things in little chunks. Look at the end goal. What's my career? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to be? What type of role do I see myself in? And then take the steps over the last 2 or 3 years to get themselves there.
Yeah, it's called backwards planning, that, isn't it? It's getting your end goal of where you want to be and then getting the steps in place and how long it's going to take you to get there, to get all those steps done in order to hit that big goal at the end.
Jim Collins, a famous business author, says start with the end in mind, and working towards your end goal of where you want to be. Because not everybody wants to stay in the same trade. There are quite a few of the guys we speak to that want to be a million miles away from the trade they've been in for 20 odd years. They want to do something different. They need to do something different for their own well-being. And you've also got veterans who are coming out who don't have a trade. Infantrymen, for example. So, but what they bring is the military mindset, the leadership and management skills, that they vastly underestimate their value in that. You know, you put a veteran and infantryman against their equivalent civvy as a manager or a leader. I will take your veteran every single day of the week without question. They're just on a different level when it comes to leadership and management.
Absolutely, and I mean, you know, I run a business, and I honestly believe that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for the military teaching me the discipline. And, you know, even when I'm going to do a sales call where I sort of go and measure up for a marquee hire, I'm always there 10 minutes early just to make sure that if that customer gets there, I'm there to greet them. I never like turning up a couple of minutes late when they're already stood there, if we're meeting at, say, a wedding venue or something. And, you know, people sort of, they notice those little things about you. I always dress smart. I'm always, you know, clean, and it's all the things that you get taught in the armed forces that are drummed into you, and you just do as second nature now, and it does set you in good stead for every sort of part of your life.
And we sponsored the resettlement awards about 3 years ago with Pathfinder. Bill Turnbull was comparing, and the guy who won the resettlement sort of person of the year award, Bill interviewed him, and he'd lost his legs in Afghan, and he set up a business and done really well. And Bill said, you know, you must be incredibly proud of what you've achieved. And he said, not really, you know, I've just got on with it. He said, but you know, you lost both your legs, and you know, that's it's amazing how you've come back. Well, it's just one of those things. But you know, I think as veterans, we can relate to that, the mindset of that, because adapt and overcome is built into us as veterans. And Bill Turnbull just couldn't get his head around that. And I think that's maybe one of the challenges that veterans have, is they massively undersell themselves, more often than not. And civvies are very good at selling themselves. So part of the work that we do is to try and help them to build themselves up a little bit, so that when they present themselves at interview, they're absolutely on it. And they're at least in level pegging with a civvy, because if we can get them to that stage, away they go. You know, they're in really good form after that.
Yeah, because there's that age-old saying, isn't there, when we're in the armed forces, we either go over it, round it, or we go through it, like, you know. And if you take that mindset into the sort of job hunting arena, then you're not going to do, they need to take that and take that mindset, not undersell themselves at all. I think one thing that I know a lot of people go on, not go on about it, but they mention it a lot. It's mentioned a lot in resettlement, and I 100% know that you will be saying it to people that you represent and help get jobs, is translating the military lingua into so civilians can understand it. So there's no good in talking about spinning dits down the naffy, because they won't understand that. You've got to translate your CV into the civilian qualifications, if you like.
Yeah. So the qualifications aren't as much the challenge now. I think after the Defence Training Review at the back end of the 90s, the military started making some changes to the qualifications. So, for example, I was an A1 musician. An A1 musician means absolutely nothing to a civvy. So if I was going to try and get a job as a peripatetic music teacher, it would mean absolutely nothing. Grade 8 theory, grade 8 practical means something to my employer. So what they started doing was looking at the qualifications offered in service, what they meant, what was included in those, and the course designers and training analysts would then start to look at the three services together. And they found out that 80% of many courses were exactly the same. That can't be a surprise.
Yeah.
And when they map that across to civvy courses, they start to find that NVQs and civvy qualifications, 80%, 90% of it is the same stuff. So if they're able to make a few changes to some of the modules, they're able to offer NVQ level 3, NVQ level 4 sometimes, professional qualifications that mean something to civvies. So what happens now is a CV that I will get now is totally different to 20 years ago. I remember the first CV that I got was WO2 Tony Giroux, a really good guy from Hull that I met. And he had loads of qualifications in the CV, but there was so much in there about military qualifications that just doesn't happen anymore. You know, it's all about the civvy qualifications to try and help them transition into work. So it's much better than it used to be.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so I always ask this question here, and it's a very, very burning question, and it can be quite controversial. So feel free to answer it how you want. If you had a magic wand, what would you change about the resettlement process at the moment?
Had a magic wand. I would make sure we had check-ins all the way through the first 12 months post-service. I think the guys are left a little bit too much to their own devices after they left. And I would set up some kind of buddy system so that happened. So you had a buddy, you'd always had somebody you could engage with and talk to and support and help you through. That would be a massive plus. I know somebody would need to pay for it somewhere, but that would make a difference to a lot of people transitioning. I think it would cut back tragic things like veteran suicides, because a lot of that happens in that first 12 months of transition to help them get settled into a new life. It is a very different way of life. They need support straight after that. It's no good getting them onto a resettlement course, getting them prepared for Civvy Street if they hand their ID card in and they're gone. That's not a good transition experience for me. That transition experience shouldn't end until they're quite well down the line. And I think a 12-month period is a reasonable run-off period. And even then, there should be available support. You should be able to go somewhere. There should be coordination across the great military charities to be able to support and help that, club together and make that happen. That is absolutely doable. And if Johnny Mercer or one of his teams listening to this, that's one of the single best things that they could do. One of the best things they could do to support veterans would be to make sure that transition is locked down. A buddy system is set up, and those guys get the support they need.
Well, I'm going to try and get Johnny Mercer on the podcast, so I'll put that to him. I'm absolutely blown away by that idea. I've never heard that concept yet, and mate, I back you completely on that. I think that's got legs, because I think with a buddy system, it's not necessarily going to cost a lot of money. If you're buddying up with someone who's left recently at the same time as you, is that what you mean?
Well, that could work in a whole lot of different ways. You could you could have a veteran who's been out for a while, giving them a bit of guidance and support, maybe in a volunteer basis, maybe in a paid for basis, or you could have a couple of guys leaving together. Because you know what that buddy system's like, that camaraderie. It just helps to get you to get you through.
Yeah. Well, I call on a lot of my friends. You know, you'll know yourself, running a business is a very lonely existence, and I've got a few friends who run businesses as well, and I sort of bounce ideas off them. Sometimes they'll tell me to shut up and don't proceed with what my idea is, and sometimes they'll back me and say, yeah, carry on, mate, that's really good. That if you need any help with it, we're here to back you. So I think that would work the same way, wouldn't it? You know, but yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea, Graham. Yeah, I'm going to make a note of that for future. If I can get Johnny Mercer on, I'm going to put that to him. Okay, so yeah, the magic wand question's been answered. So moving on to the Forces Recruitment Solutions Group. So I've done a bit of research on your website and everything else, and you came recommended to come on the podcast by a very, very sort of close friend of mine. So just tell us a little bit about the company backstory. What made you start it, and how has it come on over the 19 years that you've been going?
So I started it back in 2001, and I felt that I'd taken Quest really as far as I could. I always had a burning desire to set up my own business, and foolishly I'd no recruitment experience. I just jumped straight in and thought I'll work this out as I go. With the benefit of hindsight, I should have taken a year or two out to work in a recruitment agency to really understand how recruitment works. But I just, just bold as brass, I thought I'll figure it out. I did, but it was a tough first year. But I think the altruistic part of what we do is really nice. We got a call during lockdown from a guy we placed 3 years ago, and he just rung us up out the blue and said, "You placed me 3 years ago." So you probably don't remember me, but he said, "You got me a job." He said, "I'm still in the same job, and I'm loving it." And he said, "You guys did that, and it's brought a tear to my eye. It was just, it's really nice getting stories like that, because often you don't get feedback. You put somebody into place, you check on them to make sure they've settled in okay, but 3 years down the line, you don't often hear, unless they become clients, which often happens, that they'll come back to us for other people. But that's we get little stories like that. And sometimes that comes on a bit of an off day when you're thinking, oh, that placement, that hire didn't work out. That placement, we thought we had somebody there, but it just didn't work out. And you get a little story like that, and it just gives you a little shot in the arm to G you up and go again. So it's really nice. And I set up in my back bedroom, and we've been in an office now for a few years, although we're starting to review that process now, because it's I think a lot of offices are just or companies are looking at their office situation and thinking, do we need an office? We don't get too many walk-ins or clients come to see us. For the most part, we'll go out and do visits ourselves. So it almost goes full circle for some businesses. But yeah, sort of nearly 20 years in, we've helped over 10,000 veterans into work. And it's I love getting up for work in the morning. It's just it's great fun.
Yeah, well, yes, they say if you love what you're doing, it's not really a job, is it? So that's sort of that I kind of get that vibe as well. So right, okay, so. So I've had a look at your website, and you've got an employers section and a candidate section, which I found really interesting, because some recruitment companies just have the section where candidates can apply for jobs and things like that. And I noticed on your website that you've actually got a section where employers can get in touch with you and start to sort of put their offering forward, can't they?
Yeah. So we've essentially got two customers, the candidates we represent and the employers we represent. And if recruitment works in the right way, and it should, but it often doesn't with a lot of businesses, we take a lot of time over the recruitment process. So we have a 6-stage candidate interview process to make sure that the fit is right for the job seeker and for the employer. Because we want to put somebody into work who's still going to be there in 3 or 4 years' time.
Sure.
So they can enjoy a good creative second career, and they add a lot of value to the business. So it's a win-win. It's good for us. It's good for the candidate, good for the employer. And our simple philosophy, Iain, is if we get that part right, then the company will come back and use us again. We can put more veterans into work there. And I absolutely stand by that. It's taken a little while to fine-tune those processes, but it's
what are the 6 stages? What are the six?
So we'll get a candidate registered first of all. So we'll take information like their salary, location, what they need from their next job. The head resourcer will interview them just to see what they're looking for, see what kind of fit they might be for the role they've applied for. That's then passed on to one of the consultants. The consultant then does a more in-depth interview with them. And then they're usually passed on at that stage to employer. We'll then do a behavioural assessment at that point. If the employer selects them for interview, a preparation interview after that, and to put them under a little bit of pressure under interview conditions, just to see how they react to the questions we expect to come up at interview. And then we'll do a debrief as soon as they come out, and then any follow-ups after that. So it's a pretty comprehensive process that we walk candidates through to make sure that it's right for them all the way through the process. And it's quite robust. And some candidates get to a point in the process where they think, do you know what, I don't think this is the right role for me. And that's totally fine. Because a lot of well, not a lot, but a number of candidates who leave the forces just take the first thing they get when they come out, and they dive straight into a job because they need a job. Not always the best thing to do. I can understand that feeling because I've been there, and I did exactly the same thing. I just took pretty much the first thing that came along. It was a disaster. And it took me probably a year before I got in with a company with a good training policy where I could get my head in and really learn about my career in sales, because it was done properly. So my advice would be, don't jump at the first thing you see. Plan your resettlement really effectively and look at your options.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we've gone on that yet. So just while we're on with behavioural assessments, talk to me a little bit more about that.
So I've been training in behavioural assessments for probably 6 or 7 years now, and we've used different behavioural models down the years to assess for different things. Some for new hire, some for team building, some to assess different types of traits. Some maybe specific to a career in something like sales or customer facing. One of the models we use quite a lot now is a model called Contribution Compass. So what we do is we'll give the employer a free job survey to do, and they look at the contribution they need for that role. So it essentially tells us in behavioural trait terms what they need. So is it somebody who's creative and really driven? Is it somebody who's a completer, who's got an eye for service? Is it somebody who's really personable and a relationship builder? Or is it somebody who's got a refiner, who's got a really fine eye for detail? Yeah. And those are all different people. So you could essentially have an engineer in one of those 4 different types, just using engineer as an example. And it could be the same skill, but a different person. One of those hires will stay there for a long time and work out really well. And one of them will be gone in 3 months because they don't have the right behavior and attitude for the job, even though they have the skill. Yeah. And the other 2, it depends on their balance of numbers, how well that would work. But in my experience, employers tend to hire on skill and fire on behavior, but they assess the skill and not the behavior, and that's nuts.
Yeah.
So if they want the hire to work out to give it the best possible chance, they assess the skill. So if it's an engineer, they'll usually do a fault find of some sort. If it's a sales job, they'll do a role play with them, and then they'll trust their gut feeling. They'll spend however much, 30, 40, 50, 60 grand on a hire, and not assess what that natural behaviour looks like and how closely aligned it is to the role. It's a massive mistake,
Yeah.
and that is fixable. So that's why we build that into our process, to make sure that we get that hire right. So any business investing in a recruitment fee, it's money well spent, and it's an insurance policy to protect against a hire that just doesn't work out. Because again, it's not good for the candidate, not good for the employer, not good for us.
Yeah. It's just a sort of pointless exercise if you don't do that,
Yeah,
isn't it?
totally.
Because it's guesswork, isn't it? It's just sort
That's
of.
right. I totally, and it removes the guesswork.
Yeah.
When we started doing this, we almost never have somebody leave. I think it's happened once in a couple of years, because that effort goes into making sure the fit is right and the hire is right. It makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
And some of the companies even approach us for team training. So they'll get me to come in and look at their board or look at their team, and we'll evaluate the behavioural traits of the team and see how they fit together. See whether they're in flow, whether they're engaged, whether they're disengaged, and it can help people to move into the right position sometime in a team, or make sure they're doing the right things in a team to keep them engaged for longer. If you've got an engaged team, and people who are engaged coming to work day to day, where their flow, their level of engagement is up at 80%, the chance of them leaving a role like that it's really difficult. It's very difficult to leave a job that you love and you're really engaged with. If your engagement is like 40%, that's a time bomb waiting to go off. You will go. You will leave at some point, or you'll get sacked, because you can't keep disengaged indefinitely. You spend too much time at work for that.
Yeah, agreed. So that sort of ties in with the new thing that you're launching in January, which is called Military Dynamics. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we're launching a new training platform, which you've given me half an idea there on what we were talking about earlier, and I'll just come on to that in a wee second. So Military Dynamics is designed as a training platform to look at people who are transitioning out of the forces, or veterans who are looking at their second career. So we'll do a behavioural assessment with them. We'll look at there'll be loads of videos on there, content on CV prep, interview tips. We'll have interviews from ex-veteran employers on what they tend to look for, different sector information, analysis on different things. So real bags of value crammed in there to try and help that transition process, or that process into their ideal job. Which is absolutely core. And the idea you gave me is we could even set up a weekly touch point for an hour with a community, just to get people talking to each other and see what their transition experience is like. I can facilitate that, and people can just chip in, and we can support each other. So that, maybe that's the start of that kind of idea. And we just run that for an hour once a week, and give people a voice, and any challenges that they've got either through the resettlement process or getting back into work, especially with everything that's happened during COVID, then that helps to give them that little bit of support and get them back on the feet again.
Yeah, well, I won't be charging any commission for that idea anyway, Greg.
Appreciate that. Thanks, mate.
So yeah, well, that's what you've just sort of said there. Just sort of it's flowing really well, in a sense that you've just mentioned COVID. So we all know that situation is making, especially at the end of this month, when the furlough system sort of comes to an end, that there's going to be more civilians looking for a job at the same time as the guys and girls coming out of the forces. So what's your view on it?
Yeah, it's been a tough few months. There aren't too many businesses that have escaped COVID. I think even if your business has been doing quite well, and whether you've been supplying services or PPE to the NHS, you'll still have been hit in some form, because it's just a dreadful disease that just affects everybody. And we lost a guy in our team, regrettably, to suicide, and right in the middle right in the middle of COVID, which was quite tough on the guys. But it just shows that it comes in many forms. You know, it's not always the disease that gets you. It's sometimes it's got a dark cloak that wraps around people, and that's why I care about the mental health side as well. You know, and whatever we can do to support those guys in transition for that first period, I think is really important to their development and well-being. You know, I think we've got a responsibility to help and support with that.
And so, with the COVID thing sort of in the forefront of everyone's mind, I know a lot of people have been signing back on for a couple of years just to sort of ride this period out. What's your view on that?
Yeah, and I've seen, you know, we've done some work with Military Provost Guard Service, you know, so quite a few guys have taken that back up and signed back up with them as well. So, you know, a man or a woman's got to eat. You know,
yeah.
You've got to look after your family first, and you have to make sure that during a time like this that your family's looked after. So it makes sense, you know. In some cases, it's signing back up again is maybe seen by some as a step back. It's not for everybody. That's a personal choice for the individual. Yeah. But if it's right for you and it's right for your family, then it's got to be something that's on the table. Because it's, I think if you'd said at the start of lockdown, this thing's still going to be around in a year's time, I think most normal people would have thought, do you know what, 3 or 4 months, we'll be done and dusted, it'll be gone with the summer and we'll be all right. And look where we are now. You know, where there's a second lockdown threatening and looming. So it's and it could be around for 2 or 3 years. Yeah. So I totally understand guys that want to sign back up. So that's going to be a personal choice for them and their family, because there's no point in them signing on. I mean, and you know this yourself, Iain. Military guys are not good at sitting on the backside doing nothing. They have to be out doing stuff. So signing on is not gonna work for most people's circumstances.
I think as well, there's a few different sort of viewpoints of that situation. So in one aspect, it could take the pressure off you for a while if you thought, right, I'll do another 2 years, ride the coronavirus situation out and keep on with my resettlement plan and doing my courses and everything else that I need to do. It does buy you a bit of time. And to be honest, if it was me, and I had that choice, I probably would do it, just as a safety net, just because I've got children and everything else and stuff like that. But from the other sort of, if you look at it from the other point of view, is once you have signed that document to leave and you give your year's notice, you've got your heart set on it then, haven't you? You're sort of like, for whatever reason you want to leave the forces, or whether you're coming to the end of your, you know, you might have done 25 or 28 years, 32, whatever it is, you sort of got your heart set on it and you want to do it. And rightly or wrongly, military people are pretty determined people once they've got a sort of an idea in the mind. So yeah, I think I would have probably gone with the signing back on if it was me, but that's just my sort of view on it. But so just at the end of the podcast now, what is the sort of next few months looking like for the Forces Recruitment Solutions? Are you just gearing up and planning for the military dynamics, or have you got loads of other things going on?
Yeah, so I think military dynamics, building that platform at the moment to be ready for launch in January. And we'll just be preparing at the moment for current vacancies to close it over the next couple of months. I think it's going to be a mad November. I think, as you alluded to earlier, Ian, the end of furlough is going to create a bit of a bomb in the marketplace. There's going to be an awful lot of activity. And an awful lot of activity doesn't always mean a million great candidates out in the marketplace. So I think a lot of our work is going to be sifting through an awful lot of CVs to save employers time, and to try and make sure that we find the best qualified people the people with the right kind of mindset that fit into that the role an employer's got, and try and find the best candidates we can to try and put forward to the our partner businesses and agencies that we work with. So yeah, a lot of recruitment activity. I think it's going to be a busy couple of months this side of Christmas, and then get ready for the platform launch.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, it's been lovely talking to you, Graham, and you've given me a massive insight into the Forces Recruitment Solutions Group, and I'm going to sort of going to fire the link around this afternoon for you, and maybe get some people some help, especially with it being sort of like you say, a tough couple of months going. So thanks very much for coming on the podcast today. The podcast is sponsored by the Party Tent Company franchising marquee hire territories available UK-wide. Thanks for watching this episode. I'll be back next week with Flor Linkman as my guest.
Thanks, Iain.